Imagine this. You wake up one morning, the sunlight streaming through your window, the world outside buzzing with its usual rhythm. You stretch, yawn, and begin your day, coffee brewing, emails pinging, plans forming in your mind. You decide what to wear, what to eat, what tasks to prioritize. It feels like a day like any other, a day where you are in control, making choices, steering the ship of your life. But what if I told you that every decision you make today, every thought, every action, every preference, is not truly yours? What if the choices you believe are freely made are instead the result of invisible forces, hidden strings pulling you in directions you never consciously agreed to? What if the life you think you're building is, in fact, a carefully constructed illusion, a script written by forces beyond your awareness? This is the unsettling paradox of free will in modern society. On the surface, we are told we are free to choose, free to act, free to shape our destinies. Yet, beneath this veneer of autonomy lies a labyrinth of influences: cultural conditioning, biological programming, societal expectations, and psychological biases. The choices you make, the desires you pursue, even the thoughts you think, are they truly yours? Or are they the product of a system designed to keep you predictable, manageable, and ultimately controlled? Consider this. When you choose a career, are you following your passion, or are you fulfilling a narrative shaped by your parents, your peers, and the economic structures around you? When you scroll through social media, liking, sharing, and commenting, are you expressing your authentic self, or are you performing a role dictated by algorithms designed to exploit your attention? When you vote, shop, or even fall in love, how much of it is truly your choice? And how much is the result of unseen forces nudging you toward a predetermined path? The question of free will is not just a philosophical curiosity, it is an existential crisis. If our choices are not truly free, then who are we? Are we the authors of our lives, or merely characters in a story written by someone, or something else? This question cuts to the core of our identity, our purpose, and our sense of agency. It forces us to confront the possibility that the freedom we cherish may be nothing more than an elaborate illusion. And yet, we cling to this illusion because the alternative is terrifying. To admit that we are not fully in control is to face the abyss of uncertainty, to acknowledge that our lives may be shaped by forces we cannot see or understand. It is to confront the possibility that we are not the heroes of our own stories, but pawns in a much larger game. But here's the twist. What if this realization is not a prison, but a key? What if the first step toward true freedom is to see the chains that bind us? What if, by understanding the forces that shape our choices, we can begin to reclaim our agency, to rewrite the script, to become the authors of our own lives? This is the journey we are about to embark on, a journey into the heart of the illusion of free will. We will explore the hidden forces that shape our decisions, the psychological and philosophical roots of our perceived autonomy, and the profound consequences of living in a world where freedom is both promised and denied. And ultimately, we will discover how to break free from the illusion, to reclaim our agency, and to live a life that is truly our own. But first, we must confront the great question. If free will is an illusion, what does that mean for who we are and who we could become? The answer lies not in the choices we make, but in the forces that shape them. And to understand those forces, we must venture into the shadows of the human psyche, where the true nature of our freedom, or lack thereof, awaits. Let us begin. To understand the illusion of free will, we must first confront the uncomfortable truth. Much of what we consider choice is not a product of conscious deliberation, but the result of deeply ingrained patterns, both within us and around us. These patterns are shaped by a complex interplay of psychological, biological, and societal forces, forces that operate beneath the surface of our awareness, quietly guiding our thoughts, desires, and actions. Let's start with the psychological roots. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist, introduced the concept of the shadow, the part of our psyche that contains all the aspects of ourselves we reject, deny, or ignore. The shadow is not just a repository of our darker impulses. It is also the seed of our unconscious motivations. Jung believed that much of our behavior is driven by these hidden forces, forces we rarely acknowledge or understand. When we make a decision, we like to think it's the result of rational thought, but in reality, it's often the shadow pulling the strings, whispering its desires into the ear of our conscious mind. For example, consider the person who chooses a high-paying job over a passion project. On the surface, they may justify this decision as practical or responsible. But beneath the surface, it may be driven by a fear of failure, a need for approval, or a desire to prove their worth. All unconscious motivations rooted in the shadow. The choice feels free, but is it? Or is it the result of psychological conditioning, a script written long before the decision was ever made? This brings us to Friedrich Nietzsche, who famously declared, "There is no doer behind the deed." Nietzsche argued that the idea of a unified, autonomous self is a fiction. Instead, he saw the human psyche as a battleground of competing drives and instincts, each vying for dominance. What we call free will is simply the illusion created when one of these drives temporarily gains the upper hand. In other words, our choices are not the product of a rational, autonomous self, but the outcome of an internal struggle we barely understand. Arthur Schopenhauer took this idea even further. He believed that human behavior is governed by an irrational, insatiable force he called the will, a blind, driving energy that shapes our desires and actions. According to Schopenhauer, we are not the masters of our own will. We are its servants, constantly striving for goals we did not choose, driven by a force we cannot control. In this view, free will is not just an illusion. It is a cruel joke, a mirage that keeps us chasing after a freedom we can never truly attain. But the problem is not just internal, it is also external. Modern society is a labyrinth of influences designed to shape our behavior, often without our consent. Aldous Huxley, in his dystopian novel Brave New World, envisioned a society where people are controlled not through force, but through pleasure and conditioning. In this world, freedom is an illusion maintained by a system that keeps people distracted, complacent, and obedient. Sound familiar? Today, we live in a world where algorithms dictate what we see, hear, and think. Social media platforms, designed to exploit our psychological vulnerabilities, keep us scrolling, liking, and sharing, all while subtly shaping our beliefs and desires. Advertising, with its sophisticated manipulation of our emotions, convinces us to buy things we don't need, to chase status symbols that promise happiness but deliver only emptiness. Even our political beliefs, often assumed to be the product of rational thought, are increasingly shaped by echo chambers and targeted propaganda. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, argued that we are condemned to be free. That is, we have no choice but to make choices, even if those choices are shaped by forces beyond our control. But in modern society, this freedom is often an illusion. We are free to choose, but only within a narrow range of options predetermined by the system. We are free to express ourselves, but only in ways that align with societal norms and expectations. We are free to pursue our dreams, but only if those dreams fit within the confines of a consumer-driven, productivity-obsessed culture. And yet, despite all this, we cling to the belief in free will. Why? Because to let go of this belief is to confront the terrifying possibility that we are not in control of our lives. It is to face the abyss of uncertainty, to acknowledge that our choices may be shaped by forces we cannot see or understand. But here's the paradox. Only by confronting this truth can we begin to reclaim our agency. Only by seeing the chains that bind us can we start to break free. This is the hidden problem at the heart of the illusion of free will. It is not just a philosophical abstraction, but a lived reality, a force that shapes our lives in ways we rarely recognize. And to understand this force, we must delve deeper into the unseen consequences of living in a world where freedom is both promised and denied. The unseen consequences. If free will is an illusion, what does that mean for the way we live our lives? The answer lies in the subtle, often invisible ways this illusion shapes our personal and collective realities. From the choices we make to the societies we build, the belief in free will or its absence has profound consequences that ripple through every aspect of our existence. Let's begin with the personal. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your life's trajectory, your career, your relationships, even your sense of self, has been shaped not by your conscious choices, but by a web of influences you never fully understood. This realization can be deeply unsettling. It forces us to question not just our decisions, but our very identity. Who are we, if not the authors of our own lives? This existential crisis is compounded by the psychological toll of living in a world that constantly demands we choose wisely. Modern society bombards us with options, careers, lifestyles, beliefs, and tells us that the quality of our lives depends on making the right choices. But if our choices are not truly free, then this pressure becomes a form of psychological torture. We blame ourselves for failures that were never entirely within our control, and we credit ourselves for successes that may have been the result of luck or circumstance. This creates a cycle of anxiety, self-doubt, and burnout, as we strive to maintain the illusion of control in a world that is fundamentally unpredictable. Consider the phenomenon of decision fatigue. Every day, we are faced with countless decisions, from the trivial, what to eat for breakfast, to the profound, how to spend our lives. But research shows that our ability to make good decisions diminishes with each choice we make. By the end of the day, we are mentally exhausted, our willpower depleted. And yet, we continue to believe that each decision is a reflection of our free will, even as we stumble through life on autopilot, guided by habits, biases, and external pressures. This brings us to the societal consequences. If free will is an illusion, then the systems we build, our governments, our economies, our cultures, are not the products of rational, autonomous individuals, but the outcomes of collective conditioning. Take, for example, the consumer-driven economy. We like to think that our purchasing decisions are expressions of our individuality, but in reality, they are shaped by advertising, social norms, and economic structures that prioritize profit over well-being. The result is a society that values consumption over connection, status over meaning, and productivity over purpose. Or consider the justice system, which is built on the assumption of free will. We punish people for their actions, believing that they could have chosen otherwise. But what if their choices were shaped by factors beyond their control: poverty, trauma, systemic inequality? What if the criminal is not a free agent, but a product of their environment? This raises profound ethical questions about responsibility, accountability, and the nature of justice itself. Even our relationships are not immune to the illusion of free will. We like to think that we choose our partners, our friends, our communities, but in reality, these choices are often shaped by proximity, social conditioning, and unconscious biases. How many of us have stayed in relationships or friendships not because they were fulfilling, but because they were familiar? How many of us have chosen paths in life not because they aligned with our true desires, but because they were expected of us? And then there are the cognitive biases that further erode our sense of agency. The confirmation bias leads us to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, creating echo chambers that reinforce our worldview. The availability heuristic causes us to overestimate the importance of information that is readily available, skewing our perception of reality. The sunk cost fallacy keeps us trapped in situations that no longer serve us, simply because we have already invested time, energy, or resources. These biases operate beneath the surface of our awareness, quietly shaping our decisions and limiting our freedom. But perhaps the most insidious consequence of the illusion of free will is the way it perpetuates inequality. If we believe that success is solely the result of individual effort and choice, then we are more likely to blame those who fail, rather than questioning the systems that create and sustain inequality. This mindset justifies the status quo, allowing those in power to maintain their privilege while ignoring the structural barriers that prevent others from succeeding. The illusion of free will, then, is not just a philosophical puzzle. It is a lived reality with profound implications for how we understand ourselves in the world around us. It shapes our thoughts, our actions, our relationships, and our societies. And yet, despite its pervasive influence, it remains largely invisible, a silent force that operates beneath the surface of our awareness. But here's the crucial point. Seeing the illusion is the first step toward breaking free from it. By understanding the forces that shape our choices, we can begin to reclaim our agency, to make decisions that are truly our own. This is not an easy task. It requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it is also a necessary one. If we are to live lives that are authentic, meaningful, and free, the journey is far from over. The next step is to explore how we can break free from the illusion of free will, to reclaim our agency and build a life that is truly our own. How to break free? If the illusion of free will is a prison, then the key to escaping it lies in awareness. To break free from the invisible chains that bind us, we must first see them clearly. This is not a passive process. It is an act of rebellion, a deliberate, often painful journey into the depths of our own minds and the structures that shape our lives. The first step in this rebellion is to confront the unconscious forces that drive our behavior. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is the essence of shadow work, the process of bringing our hidden motivations, fears, and desires into the light of awareness. By examining the parts of ourselves we have ignored or denied, we can begin to understand why we make the choices we do. For example, if you find yourself constantly seeking validation from others, ask yourself, where does this need come from? Is it rooted in childhood experiences, societal expectations, or a deeper fear of inadequacy? By tracing these patterns back to their source, you can start to disentangle yourself from them, to make choices that are truly your own rather than reactions to unconscious wounds. But awareness alone is not enough. To truly break free, we must also challenge the external forces that shape our lives. This means questioning the narratives we have been taught about success, happiness, and what it means to live a good life. It means resisting the pressure to conform, to follow the path laid out for us by society, and instead forging our own way. Friedrich Nietzsche called this process becoming who you are. He believed that true freedom lies not in following the rules, but in creating them, in defining your own values and living by them, regardless of what others think. This is not an easy path. It requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to face criticism and rejection. But it is also the only path to authentic freedom. Consider the story of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. In the midst of unimaginable suffering, Frankl discovered that even when everything is taken from us, our possessions, our freedom, even our loved ones, we still have the power to choose our response. This is the essence of existential freedom, the realization that, no matter our circumstances, we always have a choice. But how do we cultivate this kind of freedom in our own lives? One way is through mindfulness, the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. By becoming more aware of our thoughts, feelings, and actions, we can begin to see the patterns that govern our behavior and make conscious choices rather than reacting on autopilot. Another way is through critical thinking. In a world saturated with information and manipulation, it is essential to question everything: the news we consume, the products we buy, the beliefs we hold. By developing a skeptical mindset, we can resist the influence of propaganda, advertising, and social conditioning, and make decisions that align with our true values. Finally, breaking free requires community. We are social creatures, and our choices are inevitably shaped by the people around us. But this does not mean we are powerless. By surrounding ourselves with people who support our growth, challenge our assumptions, and encourage us to think for ourselves, we can create an environment that fosters true freedom. This rebellion against the illusion of free will is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing process, a daily practice of awareness, courage, and self-determination. It is not easy, but it is necessary if we are to live lives that are truly our own. And yet, even as we break free from the illusion, we must confront a deeper truth, that freedom itself is not absolute. We are shaped by our biology, our environment, and the choices of those who came before us. But within these constraints, there is still room for agency, for creativity, for meaning. This brings us to the final, most powerful realization, that true freedom lies not in the absence of constraints, but in the way we respond to them. The ultimate truth about free will is this: it is not an all-or-nothing proposition. We are neither entirely free nor entirely determined. Instead, we exist in a delicate balance between the two, a space where freedom and constraint intersect, where choice and necessity coexist. This realization is both liberating and humbling. It liberates us from the burden of absolute responsibility, the idea that we must control every aspect of our lives. At the same time, it humbles us by reminding us that we are part of something larger, a web of relationships, systems, and forces that shape our existence in ways we cannot fully comprehend. But within this balance lies the possibility of true freedom. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. It is the ability to navigate them with awareness, creativity, and purpose. It is the ability to make choices that align with our deepest values, even in the face of adversity. It is the ability to find meaning in the midst of chaos, to create beauty in the face of suffering, to live authentically in a world that often demands conformity. This is the essence of Viktor Frankl's insight, that even in the most oppressive circumstances, we can choose our attitude, our response, our way of being. This is the essence of Nietzsche's call to become who you are, to embrace the constraints of existence and use them as a canvas for self-creation. This is the essence of Jung's shadow work, to integrate the hidden parts of ourselves and reclaim our wholeness. And so, the journey ends not with a definitive answer, but with a question: what will you do with the freedom you have? Will you cling to the illusion of control, or will you embrace the uncertainty of existence? Will you follow the path laid out for you, or will you carve your own? The choice, as always, is yours.